Hello, good evening and welcome. I'm Karima Brown and you're watching Political Exchange, where we unpack Africa's political economy. South African Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan will tomorrow, at least according to most analysts, reiterate his commitment to curbing government spending and narrowing the country's deficit despite the upcoming election in April next year. He's also expected to reduce his 2.7 growth forecast. Well, to help us play Sangoma and to peek into that crystal ball is Dr. Iraj Abedian. He's the CEO of Pan-African Capital Holdings, and joining me also is Vukani Mde, who is a political analyst at Africa Practice. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Dr. Abedian, do you agree with the analysts? Are we likely to see a downgrading of the growth forecasts, and are we going to not have to get very excited about this medium-term expenditure framework speech?
Absolutely. The Minister of Finance, for the first time in our 20 years of democracy, has got absolutely no room, either on the revenue side or on the expenditure side, on the political side. He's facing an election coming, right. So he's literally in a very tight corner. Mm-hmm. Last year, this time, he was expecting a growth of 3%. If you recall, by February, it was 2.7. At the moment, the most optimistic is the Reserve Bank's projection of 2% growth.
Right. That's consistent with the IMF's projection. Yeah. Do you think that is where we're going to be pitching it? Is that what Pravin is going to do, or do you think he's going to be even more cautious?
I think if he learns from his own 4 years of every time projecting higher and ending up with lower, he should be prudent. He is on the line for losing credibility on that front. Prudence is the name of the game, but I think more importantly, given that this is not the annual budget, this is the medium-term budget, he has to come up with a configuration of expenditure primarily and a set of policies that would prevent another downgrade. Mm-hmm. If he comes up with any electioneering type of expenditure medium-term plan, and South Africa would then face a second downgrade almost without a doubt.
Mm-hmm. Vukani, can the finance minister ignore the political pressures given the fact that we are so close to an election?
No, he can't. I was reading a preview this week which called Pravin Gordhan's job perhaps the biggest hospital pass in the history of financial management. And quite frankly, it's true, and you have to approach any analysis of the situation with some sympathy for the man. Mm-hmm. Over the last 4 years, he has faced ever declining economic performance. He doesn't have the expansionary freedom that Trevor Manuel operated with for over 10 years as finance minister. There is a national development plan on the table.
Well, everyone is going to be looking for what kind of budgetary allocations
exactly.
the NDP is going to be
and this is pretty much the first medium-term expenditure framework
for those
that follows after the adoption of the NDP by both the ANC and the state officially. He did indicate in February in the annual budget that from now on they will attempt to align expenditure plans with the NDP. What the MTEF is going to do tomorrow is to signal precisely how they plan to do that. And given the very bad economic situation we are in, it's going to be very interesting how to see what they do.
Iraj, I was looking at you whilst Vukani was speaking with Marwan, and of course you were smiling and nodding your head in agreement with a lot of what Vukani was saying.
Well, I was smiling because NDP, as we have it, doesn't really need money. It's all about political will. For example, let's take the heart of budget. 20% of it is education. NDP doesn't say we must spend more on education. NDP says you must get quality of education going. So if the if the Minister of Finance wants to now align this medium term with the ideals of NDP, he has to come up with something like, we're not going to pay for teachers who are incompetent unless they pass a competency test. But behold the political challenge there. Every step of aligning budgetary allocation with NDP goals means some major political decisions that it's not up to the Minister of Finance. It's really up to the cabinet as a collective and the president in particular to say, are we going to pull the financial resources, as limited and as constrained as they are with the ideals of NDP, that's going to be the challenge.
Vukani, the question of room to maneuver, both fiscally and politically, let's look at the politics of the matter. The NDP is obviously not without contestation and not without its critics, but Pravin has effectively nailed his colours to this plan, and so too, of course, has the president. For that, he has backing. Many people will say that Pravin doesn't have the kind of political capital required in the African National Congress to drive through his vision. Do you believe that?
Well, it's not his vision. It's President Jacob Zuma's vision, and President Jacob Zuma does have the political capital, or at least the political weight, to be able to push through. The only problem is that some of the detractors of the NDP are precisely the people whom you would think are the constituents of that political weight that Zuma has to deploy. COSATU in particular. It's highly unlikely, particularly in the fraught and contested space that we are going to enter before a national election, that we're going to see Zuma and his government push through on the NDP, at least until the second half of 2014, after the elections. And therefore, we might get, what we might get tomorrow is a kind of like holding a statement, as it were, on spending priorities linked to the NDP.
But will it be enough, though?
It depends. Will it be enough for whom? Will it be enough to hold off opposition to the NDP from within the ruling alliance? It seems unlikely. But it might be enough to hold off an out-and-out fight over the NDP and its spending priorities.
The reason why I'm asking, gentlemen, what kind of clout the finance minister has, if, for example, we take the youth wage subsidy, that has effectively been budgeted for, but that money hasn't actually been operationalized because the whole idea of the subsidy is still a matter of disagreement, profound disagreement. We saw COSATU reiterating in the week very strong objection to the ANC's attempt to push through Parliament legislative measures that would bring young people into the economy via a very specific route. Dr. Abedian, does the finance minister have the wherewithal, considering that he might want to be thinking, I want to come back after the election? Does he have what it takes? I mean, he is no lightweight. He is an astute politician. He's adroit at managing various interests, and certainly some people believe have the ear of President Jacob Zuma.
I think he may have what it takes to navigate this contested terrain. But is it going to help him? That's the issue. It's 500 million rand. It's nothing. His 9 billion rand fund at DBSA, the jobs fund, hasn't made a dent. In fact, the latest revelations and assessment is that it hasn't produced anything. What has been used of that is almost ineffective. So I think we need to put in a broader context. We can use political weight and maneuvering to pass the parliament or bypass NEDLAC and those type of scheming and planning, but is that going to deal with the real issues that he faces or our economy faces? And I would have thought strategically, as a good astute politician, he would have to put emphasis on the strategic issues of how do we get the South African economy moving? How do we arrest the decline from close to 4% when he became the Minister of Finance to today below 2%. That's the big issue.
And of course, the other big thing is the deficit. Everyone is going to be looking at what is going to happen there. What are your predictions?
But it's very obvious. Deficit is the ratio of your what you need divided by GDP. If GDP keeps going down, the percentage of deficit out of GDP is going to go only up, and that's not good for credibility. So I think he's in a bind, as I mentioned earlier, because the real issue is GDP. And behind and below GDP is the real issue, is the lack of confidence. We have a very contested and very unsettling environment in our key sectors, mining, manufacturing, agriculture. All of that means even those who want to invest, they've been unsettled. And when investors unsettled, both domestic investors and international investors, GDP can only go one way.
Vukani, do you agree with Iraj?
In the sense that the real issue is GDP growth and very low levels of GDP growth, which don't allow us to make a dent on poverty and inequality and unemployment. Yes. But one can boil down even further. It's all well and good to speak of deficits, whether they be fiscal or budget deficits or whatever. The real deficit in South Africa, and this is a political, a long-term political and social issue, our real deficits are social inequality, poverty. That's what, whenever you budget in the context of a country like South Africa, you're budgeting for to reduce inequality and poverty and inequality, poverty, and
unemployment.
And unemployment, sorry, the triple challenges. Yeah, and so ultimately we need to see medium-term or longer-term expenditure plans in that context.
Many people are looking at what Pravin is going to look at as the drivers of low growth, and of course the ratio between what is going to be blamed on external factors and what we're going to ascribe to the domestic situation. If you were to kind of peep into his mind, what do you think he's going to come up with? Do you think he's going to have a 50-50 kind of an approach, saying, you know, where's he going to apportion blame for that, you know, growth figures that is looking increasingly dismal?
I think as a politician, you would want to blame the global situation. As a technician, I can tell you that on a scale of 0 and 100, maximum 15 of it is global. 85 of it is homegrown and homebrewed. And that's where he has got the problem. Every time that he blames the global markets too much, he loses credibility on the technical side. Because the reality is that for our exports, for our operations, global economy has had very little impact. Yes, 10% of our 100% problem. But our growth has come down not because demand for our exports have dried up, not at all. Even our conventional export markets, Europe and the US, are picking up. But we are stuck here. We are stuck because domestic policy issues, structural issues, political contestation and slating and counter-slating has taken the heart out of the confidence of the investor.
In the studio with me, I have two guests, Dr. Iraj Abedian and Vukani Mde. Vukani, let me pick up with you. Iraj was saying 15% of the woes that we face can be ascribed to international factors, realistically. I can't see you agreeing with that.
No, I don't. But the bigger point that I would like to make is that it isn't a part of the debate that really interests me to any great degree. What does interest me is that we have a problem. Now, we obviously have homegrown political and political management issues. We have homegrown structural issues that are older than any of us sitting here at this table. But there was also a huge change in the global arena about 5 years ago with the global financial crisis that has to an extent undermined demand for some of our exports. But whether that global issue or our domestic challenges are equally or to whatever extent to blame is neither here nor there. What really should be concerning all of us are the solutions.
Let's come to the question of the lack of clarity around policy. I personally find it very difficult, Vukani, to believe that can still be an issue in South Africa among investors. What about policy is not clear at this point?
Very little. Quite often the charge that there is policy uncertainty in South Africa is
is code for something else.
Is code for there's a policy direction in South Africa that we don't like. And because of that, we are now you are quite free to disagree with the government's policy trajectory. However, the charge that there's uncertainty probably doesn't hold up to scrutiny, in my view.
Dr. Abedian, I see you take a totally different view.
An example, yes.
Our education policy. Unions and government can't agree. Get the competent teachers.
Is that a question of policy?
No, but that is policy. Education is a skills, shortage of skills is one of the three, in fact, the top concern for the investors. Education policy, 20 years later, we cannot sort out. Mining policy, we thought we have cleared it, but the minister has thrown the cats amongst the pigeons, wants to change everything. Agriculture policy, we're not clear whether we want NDP or not. Government says yes, but other stakeholders say no. So NDP that we hold as the unifying factor is not unifying. 2 minutes ago, you were talking about the youth employment subsidy. Amongst the incredible unemployment problem that we have, we cannot agree, we mean the stakeholders, South Africa Inc., we cannot agree on what to do. Everything that the government says is alliance partners are first to shoot it down, other business and other, that's policy issue.
Can I just come in there? Now you see, right there, we've now shifted the ground. The issue isn't so much policy uncertainty, it's policy contestation. Now contestation and uncertainty aren't always the same thing. In every transparent democratic society, policy is decided through a process of debate and often out-and-out fights. Now, we are no different here. That's why we, up to this point, don't have a consensus around the NDP. However, we know what the state's position is. The cabinet has adopted the NDP. We know what the state's position is on the amendments to the mineral and petroleum resource
okay, if let's assume that we have policy contestation, which in some quarters is interpreted as policy uncertainty, and in others it's a question of the door hasn't closed, we can still get our amendments in, like COSATU would like to believe on the NDP. But ultimately, it has to come through the funnel of implementation, isn't it? And it can either stall or it can go in quicker and get us to the point where things change, hopefully for the better. Let's talk solutions now, Iraj. If Pravin is to show a very clear sign of leadership, what is he going to tell us?
He has to put some key issues on the table with a timeline and say, we will get done, come high or hell. That is the thing. For example, you can't say we agreed that teachers must teach. Remember Trevor Manuel 6 years ago said teachers must teach on time, not drunk, and so on. 6 years later, the teachers don't teach, they're not competent, and they are drunk. So what is implementation? And the issue is, what are the key obstacles to this economy? Is it electricity? 4 years later, we still cannot deliver Kusile, Medupi. Why? Teachers are still incompetent. 10 years after recognition. Why? So it's not good to analyze and super-analyze. The Minister of Finance and the Cabinet has to come and say, these are the top issues that holds the economy back. These are our solutions. These are our timelines. We're going to get it done. You want to have policy contestation? Have a conference. We'll watch it. We'll participate in there, but the show will go on. That's what he has to do.
Can politics be done in that way? And more importantly, is that what Pravin is likely to do?
Not in open democratic societies, not in a difficult societies, quite like South Africa is. We're a country that's very hard to govern, obviously because of our legacy issues.
That's policy uncertainty. That's policy uncertainty.
Well, Vukani,
a lot of what Dr. Abedian ascribes to policy uncertainty is failures in implementation, quite frankly.
Okay, let's talk about that. I hosted a debate on this very channel between the minister responsible for planning, Trevor Manuel, the chair of the Business Unity South Africa, or rather the person responsible for the NDP and social policy, Raymond Parsons, and of course the COSATU president, Dumo Dlamini. And what was clear there is that the social partners were not agreeing on the form and substance of the NDP. But there was a push that whilst there's some disagreement on certain issues, we ought to be able to press the green button and say go. Is Pravin going to signal that, Vukani?
Of course we should. I referred earlier to the fact that the state has an expenditure plan over the medium to long term of about 3.5 trillion rand on the economic and social infrastructure that we need in order to achieve some of the NDP's goals. None of the social partners would dispute that, would dispute the goals envisaged in the NDP, nor the fact that the state has to invest in social and economic infrastructure to get there. Obviously, there will always be contestation around how to get to those things, and Pravin, quite frankly, needs to take the lead in showing us a way in how we're going to get there.
Now, of course, we have also seen the finance ministry generally setting the tone for anti-corruption measures in the state. We've had a procurement officer, we've had the naming and shaming campaign, expenditure over a particular amount having to be signed off at a national level to try and, undo some of the malfeasance that was happening in various provinces. Iraj, to what extent is Pravin, on the eve of an election, going to be making fiscal noises around corruption, or anti-corruption rather?
Well, he's obviously going to, as a Minister of Finance, have to say something. And we can almost predict what he'll say. He'll condemn it, he'll say we have a super anti-corruption chief director. But will it change anything on the ground? Will the municipalities be less corrupt and the entrepreneurs in different parastatals and so on be swayed by that or scared by that? No. We've seen that over the past 3 years. In every budget speech he has talked about all kinds of measures, and every year the level of corruption has increased. Because corruption is not done on a technical level, it's done by politically well-connected, untouchable people. That's the problem.
But
can he tangle them? No, he can't.
But we saw, for example, him axing Mr. Magashule, the head of the revenue services, who was caught, of course, in a very compromising position. Does that not signal confidence in the finance minister's ability to not just diagnose the problem, but also act? Because
that was under his ministry's control. I have absolutely no doubt that if everything was under his control, he would have cleaned them up. The problem is that go outside the tunnel of National Treasury and SARS, everything else falls under some other minister, some other province, and he has no control other than running to the president and saying, President, can you do something about it? And then things go into a process of political solutions, and 5 years later, still corruption continues.
Vukani, of course, we know that a lot of what goes wrong in South Africa at the level of implementation is in the provinces, of course, because that is the big vehicle for actual implementation and actualizing whatever financial, tranches have been allocated. We've seen the National Treasury step in to provinces where there have been problems, whether it's via special constitutional acts putting certain departments under administration, others in literally taking the monies back. Do you think that he's going to take an even tougher stance, particularly as the ANC and the ruling parties under pressure to demonstrate that it will act against wrongdoers as we go into the election?
I don't know that it's possible to take an even tougher stance on corruption, whether it be within his own area or in the provinces and the municipalities. It's not possible to take a tougher stance. The government, both in word and deed, has taken a very tough stance on corruption. They've put in place some of the mechanisms that we need. Yet the problem persists, largely because corruption has sort of seeped into the very way that we do
into the DNA of how
into the DNA into the fabric of the state and our society. It's not just the state, by the way. It's in the private sector. It's in society generally.
Dr. Abedian, the expectation is that we're going to be having a downward grading on the growth forecast. If you were to be that Sangoma, what do you think is going to pin growth forecasts at?
I mean, he has to technically put it currently, unfortunately, at about 1.8, 1.9 in an optimistic way, not too. And then next year he has to bring expectations down, which means all his ratios are going to go the wrong way. Therefore, on that he has no control. Where he has to watch it is that how he's going to bring expenditure under control. The most important one, of course, there are two items: welfare spend and wage, government, state wages. Both of them are politically sensitive in the run-up to the election. And that's the method of the finance minister. Can he bring back the stability into the macro picture despite the election and gain credibility for his own and for his cabinet? Or is he going to go the tacit populist way and say, we're not going to touch this thing because it's not good for election? And if that happens, you can rest assured that between now and February, March, the downgrade will come. Remember, he's on watch. He's on a negative watch, which means they're watching every single sentence that he utters. And he's not in a comfortable space.